I see. Oh, then I need to send him a message. I thought that I would see him today. Oh. Okay, you guys tell me when I can start. CG can give me a green light. Yes? We are all prepared on the online. Todo tá bem. Con mi portuñol que conheço. ¿Sí? Bueno, digo. Okay. So, today we are going to talk about grammaticalization in case of language contact. And after 3 days of a lot of theory, I think might be kind of nice to do something a little bit else, like something different, you know? So I hope you're going to like it. And we're going to look at grammaticalization from different approaches towards language contact. Yeah, because I believe I took 4 different readings. One reading is the one in that we have in Hopper and Traugott, and they are talking about language contact from, or language contact and grammaticalization from the perspective of Creoles and Pidgins, because it's quite interesting how the change happens in Creole and Pidgins. Yeah, how grammaticalization progresses. And then we are gonna look. One paper is the one of Eichenwald about grammaticalization in the Amazon. So that's nice too. There is also a paper that CG and Gabriela yesterday asked about polygrammaticalization. A very seminar paper on the language called Rama, which is a Chibchan language. And there's one paper more. From Kutieva, Heine and Kutieva on contact-induced grammaticalization. Yeah. So those 4 papers today we're going to discuss. So you're going to have different perspective on grammaticalization in the context of language contact. Yeah. I hope you're going to like it. Some papers are nicer than others. You will tell me at the end of the day which ones you liked more. Yeah. Okay, let's start. Okay, so actually, before we start, I wanted to ask, in terms of organization, because tomorrow some of you will be presenting. I know that Gabriela wants to present about grammaticalization case that she has for the verb cia onto different grammatical domains in Apurina. That's one thing that I know. CG might be talking either today or tomorrow, depending how we do time-wise. Who else will be speaking tomorrow? As I said, it can be in Portuguese, it can be Polish if you'd like. Any language will do. Would you like to talk tomorrow? Like even it can be one slide if you'd like, and you can. Yeah, something. Perfect. Yeah, so like it doesn't, like, you can talk as long as you want. 5 minutes, 10, 15, it's up to you. Whatever you feel comfortable with. Oh, what about you guys? Perfect. Perfect. So we have 3 presentations for tomorrow. Please upload them onto the drive if you'd like. You can also upload them tomorrow. Doesn't really matter. Just I think it's easier for the guys. They do the magic with things. And I like Ella. I know that you don't want to talk. That's fine. What about you guys? You want to talk tomorrow? No, you want to listen. What about you? No, you don't want to. And you just join us. You're not going to talk about anything related to grammaticalization? Well, I mean, because we are kind of, just like, I'm trying to find out how many presentations there are going to be. You can talk, if you'd like, even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you'd like. Just if you have something like, even like a case of something that you think is grammaticalizing, or something that have had grammaticalized anything? Yeah, okay, cool. So, yeah, so one slide will do, just for us to have an idea. Yeah, would be perfect. Okay, so we have either 4 or 5 presentations, short presentations tomorrow, because I don't know if CG is going to talk today or tomorrow. Okay, cool. And for tomorrow, I've also selected up to now 4 different readings. One is from Marianne Mithun about explanation of grammaticalization. Not sure if I will do this. It comes from the Oxford Handbook of Grammaticalization. I will see if that's what, but that's one of the readings that I'm thinking of doing tomorrow. Then there's one paper that we will definitely have a look at, because that's on the request of Mateus, about the source of the Yagua nominal classification system. That's a seminal paper, how classifiers came to be in Yagua. This is a seminal paper because it's also the case for many languages from that area. So not only Peba Yaguan, but also Witotoan, also Boran, also some of the Northern Arawak languages. So this is a cool paper. Then I'm thinking, just to show you a few things from grammaticalization of body parts, only a few things. And we are going to actually just focus much more on the paper by Roberto Zariquier about the grammaticalization of body part nouns in a number of languages from South America. My question to you now is whether, and there is also one by Comrie on possession. I forgot to put it here. No, it is. Possession, cognitive sources and forces in terms of grammaticalization, and I will try to find out about what CG asked you, I think on day 1, about grammaticalization of possession. I will it's a long book, so I will not read it all for tomorrow, but I will look at some parts of it. Maybe I'll just find something nice that we can discuss, okay? Now, my question to you is whether you think that there is any other paper that would be worth discussing, or you wanted to discuss in addition to that. So, okay, cool. So what paper is this?
It's a the paper is a typological rarity in grammaticalization in Garifuna auxiliary verbs. Our Arawak. Garifuna is our Arawak language.
Cool. Cool. Okay. I am gonna look it up. It means that I'll be reading the entire night tonight, preparing the presentation. Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, Gabriela. What about you guys? You're fine with this, or you would like to add some more readings maybe for tomorrow, or some ideas that we could discuss? No? Okay. Cool. Okay. So let me sit down. And maybe we can start. Please, the next slide. Okay, so yesterday when we talked about grammaticalization, I also mentioned that fact that in addition to normal, ordinary grammaticalization, there is also polygrammaticalization. Yeah? Do you guys remember what polygrammaticalization was? Yeah? So the idea was that there is one lexical source that grammaticalizes, yes, and there is different, they diverge, just the item that grammaticalize diverge, and each of this divergent item that grammaticalizes follows a different path, yeah? I think we mentioned that in the context of what might be happening in Apurina with the verb, but I'm not sure. That's something that Gabriela and I will talk about later. Wait, let me see. There's a coffee. Wait. I'm not drinking coffee. Okay, so there's this seminal paper by Greg Collette. Yeah, it's a very known paper about polygrammaticalization, and she was talking about the Roma language of the Chibchan family. Yeah, from El Salvador, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a very known paper, so I wanted to discuss that paper with you today, just to kind of have an idea how polygrammaticalization looks like in Rama. However, just think about this in the think about it in terms of grammaticalization that you already know, because polygrammaticalization is nothing different from what we already know, only that there is many paths of grammaticalizations stemming from the same verb. Yeah, okay. So we're gonna see how that works in Rama. Please, next. Okay, so we discussed polygrammaticalization. Let me repeat again: a single source item that develops into multiple grammatical functions. Yeah, because we mostly just talked throughout the course of things, one grammaticalization client, yeah, one grammaticalization path that an item takes, such as, for instance, the future tense based on the motion verb to go becomes the auxiliary be going to, reduced, blah blah blah. That's just one path, but we are talking about multiple paths from a single source. Yeah. And what's interesting is that because we have different pathways, yes, we have different results, different outcomes, yeah, for each of those grammaticalized items, yeah. And this is put in contrast with the ordinary grammaticalization, where there is only one path, yeah, a single path for an item. Yes, so the item, yeah, diverges in terms from this normal ordinary grammaticalization. It diverges from one chain into several different directions, and some of them might grammaticalize, some of them might not. Yeah, because we said yesterday that grammaticalization doesn't mean that an item will finish to grammaticalize. Sometimes it might stop in the middle. Sometimes it might just, go away totally, so it disappears. So different directions of those grammaticalized paths that one item might take. Yeah. And as it is in case of Rama, it's also the case for many of the languages that it's mostly things like motion verbs that do this. Yeah? Okay, so please, the next slide. So in terms of the Rama language, because this is really a seminar paper, this is a very known paper, so let me introduce Rama a little bit. As I said, no, sorry, I thought El Salvador. This is Nicaragua. That's another paper. I think Pipil was from El Salvador. Sorry. We are going to talk about Pipil later on today. So Rama spoken in Nicaragua, but still a Chibchan. What it has is that the language has complex verb serialization. And that's going to be interesting because this complex verb serialization, so we talked about this in terms of clause chaining yesterday. Yeah, I was talking about clause chaining. I was talking about medial verbs. Yeah, do you remember that? Instead of, we talked about hypotaxis yesterday. Yeah, so clause chaining, basically a number of verbs. From those clause chaining, the hypotaxis constructions, you get a lot of different grammaticalizations, and today we'll also see it in the paper by Sasha Eichenwald. Serial verb constructions, they grammaticalize further. Yeah, so that's the case for the Rama language as well. Rama has complex verb serialization, and those motion verbs, yeah, they are central in the grammar. So they are responsible for many of the different meanings of those serial verb constructions. Because in Rama, we will talk about polygrammaticalization of the motion verb to go. Yeah, that's why Greg is stressing the fact that the motion verbs are central in the grammar of Rama. Please, next. Oh, I kind of repeated the slide. Please, next. Okay, so the source for polygrammaticalization in Rama is the verb to go. Yeah, move away, go. It can still be used as a full lexical verb. Yeah, so it still exists. It didn't lose its meaning. And its usage is frequent, which gives us a potential for grammaticalization. Because cross-linguistically motion verbs, as I said, they grammaticalize a lot, right? But there's also this idea of the frequency. We talked about frequency and routinization over the last couple of days. That might be in play here as well, according to the author. Please, next. Okay, so what does the verb to go, yeah, the lexical verb, how does it polygrammaticalize? So the first path that this verb does is it grammaticalizes into future tense marker. We've seen this. Easy. I mean, in many of the languages, this is the case. Yeah? So motion towards the goal, marker of future, yes? And a very common path in grammaticalization, this is the reanalysis from motion and purpose into future, because of this kind of idea that we've seen a lot, just the sense of imminence. It will happen, yeah? It's about to happen. So that's path number one, easy, we've seen this. Rama does this as well. Please, next. Okay, now, then the go marker, the go lexical verb grammaticalizes in a different way. It's not a grammaticalization of the future tense, yes, that future tense further grammaticalizes and goes into a suffix. No, what it does is the verb goes grammaticalizes by a different path. Yes, it goes into marking aspect, specifically inceptive aspect, so meaning to start. Yeah, I'm starting to talk instead of I will talk as the first path. I'm starting to talk. Yes, aspect. It focuses on the onset of an event to start. Yes, so instead of predicting the future as it was for the marker, for the first marker, yes, it frames the phase of action. Yeah, the inceptive. Yeah. So I didn't present you actual examples, but it's only the glossary and translations. But it's something like he go eat, meaning he started eating. You know? So it grammaticalizes into a spectral domain. And so now we have a verb to go that grammaticalizes into future tense. We have a verb to go that takes a different path and grammaticalizes into a spectral domain. Please, next. And that's cool thing in Rama is that it takes a third path of grammaticalization. Yeah? So it's not grammaticalization further of any of those two. Yeah? It has the third path of grammaticalization. It grammaticalizes into sequential marker. Yeah, so it is used as a light verb in serial verb constructions. You know, generally, it kind of like semantically it denotes sequence of events. So something like, I don't know, an action A is followed by an action B. So something like, example here, he cut, go, put, serial verb constructions with the verb to go. He cut, go, put, meaning he cut and then put. So the meaning is sequence. So it kind of goes into this light verb auxiliary grammaticalization that is different from the future tense, and it's different from the inceptive aspectual marker that we see before. Yeah? So there is 3 different grammaticalization paths in Rama. Therefore, polygrammaticalization instead normal or grammaticalization that we know, that we see everywhere. Please, next. Okay, so those are this future, inceptive, sequential, yes. And as I said, important for polygrammaticalization, they all come from the same lexical source. Yeah? So many different outcomes, not one. Please, next. Okay. So why is it important? Why is the idea of polygrammaticalization in languages important? Because up to now, we talked about ordinary grammaticalization in which there is just one path. And we've seen throughout the last couple of days many of those grammaticalizations. Yeah? We've seen, for instance, how the verb in Old English will, yes, wish, intend, grammaticalizes into future tense. We've seen many of those things, but it was more or less linear, just one grammaticalization path instead of various. Yeah. So why this is important? Because it shows that grammaticalization is not only linear, as what we've seen, as what people think of grammaticalization, but it is branching. Yeah? It is branching. It is like a tree. Yeah? Well, it also shows something that we know and that we've seen. It demonstrates that the motion verbs are common sources for grammaticalization. Yeah? Because like when you talk about grammaticalization, you might think, okay, what grammaticalizes? And sure, motion verbs, we see them here and there, but we see that they can grammaticalize into different meanings, and it's mostly the motion verbs. There is something about those verbs that make them grammaticalize cross-linguistically. Yeah, it's not the, as I said, it's not the noun, the chair, or the ceiling, or my dress, but it's the motion verbs. So it's interesting. Yeah. And then this paper also challenges the simplistic model of grammaticalization pathways. Yes, that we talked about those clines. We had, just this noun to affix cline, a verb to affix cline, a simple cline. We also said that they are actually not that simple. They are just the like metaphorical images, what grammaticalization might be, because in grammaticalization, things are actually not linear as much. It's mostly like grouping of different characteristics along the cline. Anyhow, this paper does challenge the model of grammaticalization, that it's not as simple as we thought it was. Yeah. And then this paper kind of also goes into discussing other things, mostly like pointing to them, because it shows that, in fact, if you look very closely at other languages, you will see similar splits as well. So we talked yesterday about divergence. Yes, it seems that some of the verbs throughout the languages, if you look very closely, they might be considered to be polygrammaticalized rather than just grammaticalized. So the idea is here that polygrammaticalization is a mechanism that occurs frequently, yeah, much more frequently to what we thought. And as well, as an implication, like a broad implication of this, is that polygrammaticalization explains diversity of grammatical markers generally. Yeah. So we've heard about those beautiful theories throughout the course. Okay, it's the cognitive motivation, pragmatic motivation, semantic motivation, syntactic, and so forth. Yeah. Child language acquisition, but generally, the reason, like what Craig is kind of, just pointing out to, the reason why there is so much diversity of grammatical markers is polygrammaticalization rather than simple ordinary grammaticalization. So, like we've seen, I think, that example of the hand yesterday, yeah? The hand that grammaticalizes into agentive markers. Number 5, locative expressions. And there was the fourth one, now I forgot, yeah? But that diversity is explained, might be explained through polygrammaticalization rather than other things in the language. Please, next. Yes, so that was that paper of polygrammaticalization, the seminal paper on what it is. Obviously, there is like a lot of other papers published by it, but that was the foundational paper. And that was the question that CG had. Is this enough in terms of explication of polygrammaticalization, CG? Yeah? This idea of that it's not linear, but it's branching, yeah? So yeah, do you guys have any questions about polygrammaticalization? I put this paper onto Google Drive as well. You know, so just also look in the sources yourself. But I think you can actually create an entire course of a semester about polygrammaticalization. So we are just getting things quickly here, yes. But have a look, because this is a really cool idea. Okay, let me see the time. Okay. So that's one point that I wanted to discuss today, and then I wanted to move towards the explanation of grammaticalization in terms of language contact. And as I said, there is different approaches towards language contact and grammaticalization. We are going to see two main ones today. This is the first one, the Pidgin and the Creoles. And there is also going to be a second one in terms of ordinary grammaticalization and replica grammaticalization. Yeah, that's going to be the second paper that we discuss. Maybe after the coffee. I don't know how long it's going to take us to focus on those things. I hope a little bit longer, because this is really a cool topic to discuss. Please, next. Okay, so before we get into grammaticalization and language contact, yeah, we can kind of focus on the traditions of how language is transmitted. And we've seen a couple of those theories throughout, like at the beginning when we talked about grammaticalization. We've seen a little bit about language acquisition. I mentioned the generative approach about universal grammar and so forth, yes? But generally, when you look at those traditions, you kind of have this idealized, homogeneous is the key word, model of language transmission, yeah? Because generally it's claimed, and it's been like an opinion that has been held very frequently in the recent research, is that languages don't grammaticalize without contact. It's very difficult to have a grammaticalization without any influence of any other source. Yes, even in histories of, for instance, English, that you might think, okay, this is like a very straightforward grammaticalization path. Think that England has been invaded by Scandinavian groups. And thanks to that, English grammaticalized a lot. So even with things like this, there is no grammaticalization that goes outside of contact. There's always some degree of contact in grammaticalization. Yeah? So you cannot look at grammaticalization in terms of this idealized, homogeneous environment where nothing ever happens. So that's why Hopper and Traugott talk about situations of contact. Yeah. And and situations of contact in terms of many different groups, many different varieties within the groups, many different registers, many different hierarchies, social hierarchies that all influence grammaticalization. Yeah. However, he's mentioning this, and this is a very good introduction in terms of language contact that we're going to see in the second paper today. But what Hopper and Tragot do, they focus on pidginization and creolization. Yeah? And why do they do this? We talked about this idea of grammatical change, that it starts with the kids, and so forth and so forth. There is this process I mentioned, there is this process of induction, deduction, abduction, that at some point the speaker might understand the output of the grammar 1 as the grammar 2. You know, so there is the change because it was misinterpreted. We talked about this kind of goal-oriented situations and the problem solving, that the speaker might not necessarily understand the perfect grammar that was in speaker 1, but it might change a little bit. Yes, we talked about those things. Yeah, but they Hopper and Tragot, they say that pidginization, so pigeons and creoles, are this perfect example where you can actually see grammaticalization in progress. Because the title of this chapter is Grammaticalization in Extreme Contact. Yeah. So they are not talking about borrowings. They are not talking that in the Amazon there is a tendency to borrow the word for coca, let's say, because this is a normal situation, or as we are going to see in the paper of Sasha Eckenwald, under contact with Tucano, you get, you know, just those categories that are grammaticalizing. This is not what they're talking about. They are taking specifically extreme contact situations, yeah? Not the linguistic areas, not borrowing, extreme contact situation to discuss the linguistic change in terms of grammaticalization, because you can see those changes happening. We talked that grammaticalization generally is a very slow process. I believe from the example from Old Mesopotamian, yeah, into Akkadian, if I'm not mistaken, the process took about 2,000 years. Now, when you have pigeons and creoles, that situation is it's 100 years, maybe 50 years, depending on a different type of creole, yeah? So that's why it's so great to see what happens with grammaticalization in those contexts. And the research from pigeons and creoles, they have actually challenged many of the assumptions that we have about grammaticalization, yeah? At least up to now, because there is that cool paper that we're going to discuss by Tanya Kutieva and Bernd Heine that tell us, well, whether those assumptions that we had from pigeons and creoles, maybe they are not that perfect. Yeah. Anyhow, those studies, they challenge our ideas what grammaticalization might be, and about how homogeneous grammaticalization is across the languages in the world. Yeah? Okay. Please, next. Okay. So, the main idea of Pidgin and Creoles, I'm sure that you all know this, so I'm not going to dwell on this. But generally a Pidgin, non-native language, yes, it develops in contact situations where there is disparities in terms of the culture, in terms of the numbers, trade contact, slave contact situations, yes. And what's interesting is that they are assumed, yeah, to have a relatively simple grammatical structure. Me as a linguist, I tend to kind of question the idea what's a simple grammatical structure, but let's go with Hopper and Tragot and just keep the simple grammatical structure. And there is many examples of pigeon. Obviously, you've heard many of them, and there's going to be a question that I will have later on about pigeons and Creole in Brazil. So maybe you can kind of think about it, because I will ask. I don't know much about Brazil, so you can tell me. But some examples, yeah, include, for instance, West African Pidgin English, yes, where it is a pidgin that was lexified by English as a superstratum was English, yes, and the substratum languages were some local African languages, yeah, and it originated as a language of commerce between British and African slaves, yes, and today there is about 75 million people speaking West African Pidgin English, yeah. Okay, please next. Now, that was Pidgin, yes, relatively simple grammatical structures. And then you kind of go into Creoles. So Creoles tend to be the non-native, the native languages, yes. So already the Creoles are the languages of the next generation that speaks the Pidgin. It's not always the case, because many times Creoles are also spoken by adults, yes, who learn the language as a second language acquisition. So it's not necessarily, just how those things were seen in the past. Sometimes pigeons might take several generations, not the next generation, to create a Creole. Yeah, it's tend to be more complex in terms of the structure than a Creole, than a Pidgin. And I kind of always wonder, like, when it comes to those kind of definitions, what a Creolization and Pidginization, I do have problems with things like simple, more complex grammar, things like this. So, like, those are not my words. I'm just following Hopper and Tragot here. And yes, an example of a Creole, because I don't want to dwell onto this, and I'm sure you all know about Creoles and pigeons, is, for instance, a really cool Creole, which is called Unser Deutsch. Like Deutsch, the language Deutsch, right, and German means German. So it's like a German-based Creole. And I find it cool because there isn't many German-based Creoles. Creoles are generally English-based, Portuguese-based, Spanish-based, yeah, as the main superstratum languages. But there's also German Creoles, so Unser Deutsch, yeah. I always sometimes these days there is so many different language varieties and languages popping up that I think that many of the languages that today are called languages, they could actually just be called also Creoles, and other way around. But I think that's the recent development in linguistics. Anyhow, Unser Deutsch is really cool, yeah, because it was just in the spoken by the German missionaries that went and set up missions in Papua New Guinea, and they were teaching the kids from different backgrounds in those schools, in those boarding schools, and that's where this kind of Creole, came up. Unser Deutsch. It's spoken by about 100 people. A really cool thing. I mean, like, I would like to show you the video, but I realized that the video is in German, so sorry, but really cool. Okay, please next. Okay. Again, so the characteristics of pigeons, yes. This is really an really interesting discussion that maybe, just maybe we can kind of talk about this here, because there is a number of claims about Pidgin and Creoles. How do pigeons and Creole cross-linguistically look like? Yeah. because apparently, you know, just people thought that Creoles have those very specific characteristics across the world, wherever you are, yeah? And here are characteristics of pidgins. So for instance, you know, just like you have the two major categories, nouns and verbs, yes. There is a lack of word formation in the lexicon. So there might not be compounding, there is no derivational morphology, there is a lot of periphrasis. Yes. So instead of, you know, just those constructions we talked about it in grammaticalization, first periphrastic construction, then the clitting, then the suffix. So you get a lot of periphrastic constructions. You have adverbs and some particles that express temporal, aspectual, and modal expressions. So for instance, I don't know, like here's an example, a borrowing of the phrase by and by becomes bye in West African Pidgin English. Yes, there is absence of inflection, morphology, absence of clefting, absence of embedding, blah blah blah. You know, so this is the idea. You know, just what people used to think, that this is Pidgins, this is Creoles, and now a lot of data about those things. Something that strikes me personally is that what we see around the globe is the Pidgin, is the Creoles, where the lexifier language is an Indo-European language. And I think this is a main criticism to kind of make those type of generalization, because Indo-European languages are Indo-European languages. Whether I will have an English-based Creole or a German-based Creole, the grammar will be largely the same, similar to the Portuguese and Spanish Creoles. So maybe we can discuss this in terms of, you know, just when we discuss the Creoles in Brazil, yeah? Okay, so sorry. This is okay. So this is those are those characteristics of Pidgins. However, there is also a really cool thing, because when it comes to Pidgins, you actually have jargons and what's called minimal Pidgins as well. So like Pidgins that are minimal, whatever that thing wants to say. Those are the Pidgins that are kind of characterized by slow speech. Yes, very little more morphology. And what's interesting about the Pidgins, if you look at them, when there is a rapid speech, the structures become much more complex. Well, not much more complex, but more complex than in a normal slow speech. What does this remind you of? It reminds you of what we've seen in phonological erosion and grammaticalization. So, yet again, criticism towards the description of Pidgins, how simple, in brackets, what simple, you know, just those dramas are. Please, next. Okay, so if Pidgins are supposed to be simple, and again, simple, please, those are the features of Creoles. So apparently Creoles are much more complex. An idea what they might have is that they have articles. If you look at the lexifier languages based on Pidgins, Spanish, English, Portuguese, and Spanish, English, and German, all of them, they have articles. Yes. So if you have a Pidginization, Creolization of a Pidgin, or of the variety, yes, you will get the articles, and it's claimed that it's a universal thing for the Creoles. Well, I would say universal thing for Indo-European language-based Creoles rather than Creoles in general. Yeah. Okay, so there's also, for the Creoles, what you also see that there's some kind of tense aspect, mood, morphology. There's also this kind of irrealis, realis distinction. So So in terms of, whether an action has been completed or not completed, because that's mostly how realis, irrealis is expressed in pidgin languages. And this completed, uncompleted is kind of getting into perfective, imperfective, and then realis, irrealis. There is multiple negation as well. Yeah, that's also characteristic of Indo-European pidgins. And there is close dependency and some kind of complementation. Yeah. Now, think about it, especially like, for instance, with this complementation. We talked about clause combining yesterday. We talked about this idea that complex clauses are or seem to be generally a result of grammaticalization. Yeah, we said that. We talked about parataxis, hypertaxis, hypotaxis, and complement clauses or subordination. Yeah, so if that's the case of creoles, just regardless whether they are Indo-European or not Indo-European, you would think that, you must think that there is some degree of grammaticalization. Yeah, keep this in mind. Please, next. Whoa, I put a lot of text. Okay, so it said, we've seen that parataxis, yes, so this idea of veni vidi vici that we've seen, so there is no marker whatsoever of any sort, or hypotaxis, so there is some kind of a marker of dependency, but it's not totally subordinate, yeah? So we've seen parataxis as well as hypotaxis in pidgins, already in pidgins, not even talking about creoles, yeah? So this kind of makes you think, if pidgin is supposed to be a language that is simple, yeah, that is just resembling what, trying to keep simple morphology, how come that there is hypotaxis? If hypotaxis is a result, the next step in grammaticalization of complex clauses, right? Otherwise, we would think that languages that are not grammaticalized, they would just have this juxtaposition constructions, yes? So you would have not even parataxis. You would have things like Kasia is standing here. Kasia is talking, right? So that's not even parataxis. It's just simple juxtaposition of clauses. Parataxis is already on, like, the initial stage of grammaticalization. Yeah? And then hypotaxis is already in the middle of the grammaticalization, so how come that the pidgins, they, with simple grammar, they already have it, yeah? That kind of questions our idea of what grammaticalization might be in terms of pidgins and creoles. That's why they are cool and interesting, no? Okay. Yes. Generally, if you look at the pidgins and the variation of pidgins that is important for grammaticalization is that there is different varieties of pidgins. Yeah. Okay. So let's say that I have West African English pidgin, a pidgin English. Let's say that I have this. But as it is for any kind of a language or a ethnolect or anything like this, you're gonna have a variation within what's supposed to be a West African pidgin English. Yes? For instance, as it is for anything, actually, for Tok Pisin. Like Tok Pisin, this is a Creole these days, spoken in Papua New Guinea. When you go to one side of the island, to the next side of the island, Tok Pisin is not equal. It's spoken, it's a different varieties as it is in case of the language. But in terms of the pidgin and creoles, you're talking about basilects. So this is our West African pidgin English, yes, that is spoken in a way that the standard, if you will, is not spoken. Yeah, so kind of those outskirts, those marginal ways that the pidgin is spoken. Then you have about something like an acrolect. So this is the most closest to the standard, yeah? And you have mesolect, so somewhere in between, yeah? Not as weird, not as close, but somewhere in between. I mean, yet again, we will talk soon in the next paper about this idea of replica grammaticalization. Yeah? So I would think that this kind of continuum, even within the Pidgin, even within the Creole, it kind of shows how close you are to the lexifier language, so how many of the constructions you can actually replicate. So it would be more similar, you know, what the lexifier language is. Yeah? But it has implications in terms of grammaticalization. Well, keep it in mind. Like all this time when I'm talking about Pidgins and Creoles, let's keep in mind that we are talking about grammaticalization here, not just describing Pidgins and Creoles. Yes, it's been claimed that those basilects, yes, the basilects, so the ones that are far more removed to the standard, yeah, standard of what a Pidgin or Creole might be, they represent the original state of the language. Yeah, that was the previously held idea that those basilects, they are closest to the original language, you know, just that they come from. So let's say if there is a Creole, which Creole? A Tok Pisin. Let's say that there is a Kwa language, or Manambu language from Papua New Guinea, right? All Manambu people, Austronesian language, speak Tok Pisin, and now the Manambu speak the margins of Tok Pisin. They are not that Pidginized or Creolized, you know, just as the Tok Pisin speakers generally. So it would say that a Basilek, so the way they speak Tok Pisin would represent the Manambu language rather than Creolized Tok Pisin. However, those things have changed, and they just these days you're talking about basilects that basilects, they don't represent the original state of the language. Those ideas have changed. It's not that Manambu, the way that the Manambu people speak Tok Pisin, that they are actually more resembling Manambu. No. So those ideas have changed. And yes, and there is this kind of, you know, just this construct of social, political, I mean, reality that has to do with the Tok Pisin among the Manambu. So it has to do with this kind of social, political reality of the speakers in the context of Pidgins and Creoles. Maybe I should actually just go a little bit quicker. Please, next. Okay. So I think the last theoretical point is that if we have those if we have Pidgins and if we have Creoles, yes, they kind of ask a question of how grammaticalization is happening, how the grammatical change happens in those types of situations, yes, because it's different from the original ordinary grammaticalization, and it has been tried to be explained in terms of this bio program. Yeah, so this generative kind of grammar idea that we have those parameters in the brain, and there is a bio program that allows Pidgins and allows Creole to develop in a similar way across the languages. Because if there was no bio program, as it has been claimed by Bickerton, then the Pidgins across the world or the Creoles across the world would have developed differently. Yeah, there would be no similarities. Yeah. Now, as I said, I don't like this idea because of this Indo-European idea what a Creole or what a Pidgin is. And we talked in this course about goal-oriented communication, cognitive ability to solve prepositions, to call, to, you know, just all of those things. And many of the linguists these days, they don't think about this bioprogram idea, but it was a cool idea at the time. Yeah, this kind of, to kind of prove that universal, that generative grammar and the theory behind it was something that, you know, that was valid. Yeah. Okay. What is really interesting, I think, in this regard is that this kind of idea, who changes the language? Yes, so we kind of have Pidgin at the beginning, then we have Creoles, right? So more simpler, more complex, right? Pidgin, Creoles. And now it has been shown, generally contrary to what our beliefs might be, is that the change, yes, that happens in the Creole, the idea that it becomes more complex, is not by the kids. Yes, it's not by first language acquisition, but it's actually due to the second. So it's not the idea. Okay, so the idea was that we have a Pidgin, right? Then the speakers of a Pidgin have kids, and those kids develop the Creole language. Yes, because they are looking for some kind of parameters in the brain. Generative grammar, it looks some parameters in the brain, and therefore they make it more complex, and then that's how we get the Creole. Now, it has been shown in between, in the meanwhile, that it's actually not the first generation of the kids that are born, but it's the second generation of the kids that are born that complexify our Pidgins. Yeah. So yes, that was this kind of mind-changing idea, because it was not thought about Pidgins and Creoles in the past. That's work that Roberts did. Yeah.
You are kids, but the second generation. Now, it still are the kids, but the second generation, not the first. But what's the explanation for that?
I don't actually know what the explanation for that, but it's a very good question. I don't know. It's only shown. I only know that it's mostly the second generation that changes the language, because that's the contrary what people think. People think that's the first generation that already changed them. Yes, but apparently, you know, just this is her work. I don't know it in great details, because I don't really know. I don't work with language change so much, but I know that her work proved that it's not the first generation, it's the second, or mostly the second. I mean, you can't say in 100, you know, just in total, but it's the second generation. And what was also cool is that Roberts was also showing that those, because she was working with English Creoles, yes, she was also showing that actually that change didn't happen when the kids were learning the language with the parents, the second generation, even if you think about the first generation, but the second generation, the change didn't happen with the parents as they are young and they grow and so forth, but it actually started happening among kids that were in the context of school, yes, that were in the context of the peers. That's where the change started. Yeah, that's our path of grammaticalizations right there. Not because, I mean, it was believed that you thought, okay, let's say that I'm a speaker of a Pidgin, or I'm a child of a Pidgin, and I want to express things in the past tense. The idea was that, okay, I'm looking for some ways to express past tense, so I'm kind of starting to make the language more complex and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but it was shown that this is not the case. It's the kids that in some kind of a social context start to change, develop the language. And that's a beautiful argument for grammaticalization as well. Yeah, because it's not the way that one speaker thinks that later on might change the language, but it's the change within the community, with the pressures of the community, many times under contact. And that would be the motivation for grammaticalization, yeah? At least from the point of view of Pidgins and Creoles. That's the main idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, just to tell you that coffee is ready, so you decide if you wanna start at 10 or 10:30, the coffee break. It's early, but you decide. I just learned that the coffee is ready, but you decide.
Maybe I can finish because I have 4 talks today. Well, 4 parts. Maybe I can try just to finish this part, and then we can go for a coffee break whenever I finish this thing. I'll try to go quickly, so we can have the coffee. Okay, please next. Okay. Yes. Bam. Please next. Boom, boom. Okay, we can skip that example too. You can read it at home because I'm thinking coffee. Please next. Okay. So we kind of have all of that. Pigeonholes, pigeon creoles. And then there was this idea, just that also came around that time of calking, yeah? Because it has been noted around that time that some of the grammatical structures or grammaticalization paths, yes, tended to be similar in some areas, in some regions. And people were thinking, how come that, let's say, this grammaticalization path, just how come that the language developed the same thing, in this very idea, but from, like in this very region, but from that region, the grammaticalization went the other way, yeah? And they came up with this idea of calking, something that we're going to see as replica grammaticalization in the next paper, yeah? But this is where it kind of started, calking. And there, it was interesting because Bruin for Sranan in Suriname, yeah, where we have like a lot of different creoles, but Sranan had this kind of situation, yes, that was discontinuous in the sense that there was, just this abrupt change in the language, right? I mean, it started to get lexified very quickly, and you kind of had some grammaticalization paths, that could have been explained in terms of grammaticalization, because in Sranan you get, just these prepositional constructions, such as, for instance, na, any kind of noun. Baka meant like in back, in behind, something that we've seen for many of the Amazonian languages, but also for some other languages in the world. When I was talking about body part grammaticalization, do you remember that just meant behind? Yes. So the same thing happened, but in more restricted or more different syntactic environment, because those were some kind of, I think, relational nouns that turned into prepositions. Yeah. So normal grammaticalization path, you would assume, okay, ordinary grammaticalization. However, Sranan is a Creole to a certain extent, and Brown has shown that in Sranan, they are actually not the results of grammaticalization, as we would think, but they are results of calking from an African language, Ewe, yeah, and some other languages from, I believe, Niger-Congo region. So she was actually saying, hey, listen, it looks like grammaticalization, it feels like grammaticalization, but it's actually calking from another language. So we will talk about this like later on. As I said, this has been called replica grammaticalization, and we are going to talk later on about grammaticalization areas or areal grammaticalization, yeah? But that was the start, calking. Please, next. Bam, bam, bam. Yes. So the problem also with creoles and pidgins is something that we have for indigenous languages of many parts of the world is basically we have no data. Yeah. So that's something that's very difficult to kind of prove. Yeah. But if you look back, if there's anything written, if you look back, you will see this kind of calking coming from the languages that those speakers originally speak. Yeah? Please, next. Yes. And I think I am coming towards the end of this, if I'm not mistaken. At that time, one of the examples that was shown was this kind of development in Sri Lanka, like in this Portuguese Creole of Sri Lanka, because the Portuguese Creole of Sri Lanka, yes, was Portuguese lexified Creole, yeah, with the language spoken in the area of the speakers, that started to learn Portuguese and to start develop the Creole was Tamil, yeah? And then you kind of get this Sri Lankan Portuguese. So let me kind of speak my Portuñol for you so you can laugh a little bit. So the Portuguese is supposed to be in the Sri Lankan Portuguese, is supposed to be "Eu tinha dado o dinheiro para João." Yeah, do we understand my Portuñol? Perfect. Thank you. Now, in Sri Lankan Portuguese, it turned to be something like "Eu dinheiro, não sei, John pa já da tinha," meaning "Eu dinheiro, I money, John pa to John, já da give," with some kind of what is it? Not complementizer, but complement, I think. And Tina gave in the past. So literally, I had given John the money. Yeah. So the same as it was in Portuguese. Yeah. So it was interesting, for the development of this dative, pe, yeah, among some other things. And it was proven that actually this construction is a direct calque from Tamil rather than a grammatical development of para as an independent word, functional word, going into the development of an affix and a suffix, meaning dative. Because this is a normal grammaticalization path. We've seen them, yes? We kind of have some kind of a adposition, as in would be the case for para, following grammaticalization path, becoming a suffix, becoming case marker of this kind, yes? But it was shown that this is not what happened here, yeah? Para, yeah? This pe right here that looks even like para, yeah? But it's actually going back to the original, to the original suffixation from Tamil language. And that's where you kind of started talking about calking. Yeah? So that's the origin of our replica grammaticalization and the discussion about it, and the inclusion of contact situations for grammaticalization. So the next paper that we're going to discuss is all about it, so the next step in terms of grammaticalization and contact languages. Please, next. I didn't know either. Yes. Okay, so before we actually go for the break, I wanted to ask you guys, because we do have time, about Creoles in Brazil. I mean, I work in Colombia and Peru, so I don't have much knowledge about Brazil. So please educate me. Do you know if there is any Creoles that are spoken in Brazil?
Yeah, there is Caripuna here in Amapá on the border with French Guyana. It's a mixture of Portuguese, French, and I think Oyampian. maybe YMP. There is a Tupian language, maybe YMP. And so it's called Caripuna, but I don't know if it has another mix, because we have Carib languages also in the region. It has another name. Alguém lembra do nome daí do Oiapoque? Tem um nome em francês que eles usam. Some call patois, but they have another name also. Mas tem outro nome também que eles usam, que eu não lembro agora qual é. Creole, não é? Creole. Perhaps Creole also.
And do you know, like how it? So you're saying about you're talking about the lexifier languages being Portuguese and French, but those indigenous languages. So they are the lexifier languages as well, or those are the Caripuna.
Caripuna people speak this. I don't know if it's a Creole or a Pidgin. I imagine it's a Creole. One of the names they use is Creole, I think.
Yeah, because I find it really, really cool. Like in terms of, just how many even Creoles are. Because I wanted to show you one thing. Please go next. Like yesterday, after Spike was singing at Sigi's home, I kind of started looking, just for Creoles, because I thought maybe we can discuss them too. And there was one Creole that I found on internet. Please, I'm not responsible for internet, but I found this Papia do Cafundo, or Cafundo. But papiamento, I know papiamento from Aruba and Curacao. So this must be something different, also called Cupopia. Have you guys heard about this Cupopia Creole? Apparently, this is like this small Afro-Brazilian community around São Paulo, in the state of São Paulo. No? I thought that you guys are gonna, just like correct me, like we already have that one Creole that CG mentioned, that I will look it up, but apparently this one. And apparently there is some kind of, just the social dimension to this, because it's like some kind of a secret ritual, Creole, yes, obviously with some African Bantu languages, and very limited. There's only a few dozen elders, and it doesn't. Well, it's not really spoken anymore. But like I found this sentence in Papia do Cafundo. You can maybe try to read this, like, because I'm terrible, like, with the reading Portuguese. I mean, it sounds very much Polish. Cupopia é mina quando nós come. Well, I find it really cool. And I kind of wonder, like if there is like any kind of research that you can kind of, just put grammaticalization onto this. Because in case of Creoles and in case of Pidgins, you might just see those grammaticalizations really great if you know, just the source languages as well, such as, for instance, the Bantu languages, So I find it really cool. Please, next. I also found some kind of characteristics of Papia do Cafundo. Apparently, different. Do you guys remember when we talked about pigeons, the characteristics of pigeons and Creoles? So I found, just like what the characteristics of the Papia do Cafundo, the Cafundo or Cafundo, I don't even know how to, vale, do Cafundo. So, and I also have to nasalize it, right? Cafundo. I'm trying to. Papia de cafundo. Okay. So apparently the absence of copula, yeah, the presence of copula in terms of possessive verbs, yeah, which is cool because like when you talk about grammaticalization and something that CG said a few times throughout this course, we said that existential constructions express possession, yeah. So I found it really cool that you have this copula to express possession, yeah, in papia do cafundo. And then apparently there is like different word order in noun phrases, yeah, which might come from the Bantu languages because in Bantu languages you have preposed adjectives. You have definite articles, which I kind of wonder. I don't recall definiteness marking in Bantu languages, so I kind of wonder whether this is under the contact of definiteness markers from Portuguese or some kind of different noun phrase agreement. Yeah, so interesting because if there is a variation in noun phrase agreement, yes, you might ask yourself what the stage of grammaticalization is. Yeah, and that's why I want to go back to what we've done in the last couple of days. We talked about routinization. We talked about paradigmatization yesterday. Yeah, and I said that for paradigmatization, the idea is that things in the paradigm become regular. We even talked about syncretisms yesterday. Yeah, once they already become regular. However, if there is freedom into which, just disagreement within the clause might happen, it means that those things are being grammaticalized as we speak. Please, next. We are finishing now. I've also found for Brazil so-called cryptolects. Cryptolects, I wasn't really familiar with the term myself. Some kind of secret of hidden languages, yeah, from cryptos and lectos. And I found this. Português. Have you heard about Português, you guys? Yeah, I haven't. So I was really excited yesterday at midnight when I was preparing this presentation for you guys. I was like, this is cool, Português. So what do you know about Português? Please tell me. I would love to hear. Nothing? Nothing about Português? You guys?
Must be southeast.
Southeast? Uh-huh.
I think they only have like yeah, everything I know about it is like having specific lexical things, but don't know if like there's any different way of constructing sentences and all that. Just like with patois that she was talking about, there's a lot of expressions and different ways to address to people, things that in among the society we would call like oh, this is just like part of the way some people speak, like it's an accent or it's something like that.
But really, really cool. Like, but it's considered to be a cryptolect. Originally, the original idea, just the original significance of it was this kind of secret or a hidden language. Maybe these days the perception has changed. I'm sorry, what is your name? Lucas. So as Lucas was saying,
That would be Bajubá. Bajubá will be closer to a cryptolect.
oh yeah, Bajuba. I need to write it down. What is Bajuba?
It's like a gay dialect. Well, I don't know. I think it's this, right? It's not like that. It's a gay dialect. LGBTQ.
Okay, cool. But that doesn't have anything to do with some kind of, just African influence?
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of words. You can call Bajubá or Pajubá. There's a variation, and it's a gay dialect, as she said, and there is a lot of influence in African language as well. And they use some expressions or a few words borrowed from some African languages, but I don't know how to explain this too much.
And those words that are borrowed into like from the African languages, they are understandable for normal speakers in Brazil, or is it still like this hidden kind of secret?
Many of them are, but with different interpretation. But isn't there, não é Bajubá que tem jogo com as letras também, com os sons? Eles mudam? Yeah, there is some sound play that they do with some segments. They change places.
Okay. I've seen such a thing about indigenous languages among the Witotoan groups. So around 1940s, the Witotoan people were taken to that orphanage, and the kids were taken away from the families, and they were beaten and tied and castigar, like all of those different things. And those kids that were speaking the Witotoan languages, they developed some kind, like Siji said, like this play of words. So it would not be understood, just by some missionaries that would be able to understand a little bit of the Witoto. So for instance, until today, older speakers of Witoto told me about things like, for instance, the name of a noun would be Francisca. According to them, Witoto morphology, words tend to be disyllabic. So you will have fra-si, Francisca, fra-si, yes, because you can't have closed syllables. Fra-si, from Francisca. And then they would turn it around. So fra-si, si, fra. That would be Francisca. So they would have this kind of play, so the language would have stay hidden, and they would not be punished about talking how bad Francisca actually is. Yeah. So this is, I think it's really cool, and I think it questions, like, just those hidden languages. They might also question, just our ideas about grammaticalization. Yeah. So everything that we are discussing today, think it from the concept of grammaticalization, because the next papers will go into that. Yeah, we are not just talking about pigeons and creoles, but we are thinking about grammaticalization in those contexts. So how those hidden languages might actually influence our theory of what we know, how the grammaticalization paths might go. Yeah. And I think, please, next, I think that would be the last slide. We can go for coffee. Yeah, that's some kind of Maroon languages like Sranatongo, but we don't need to talk about these things. Let's have coffee, please. Next. Yes. Okay, cool. So now we are going to talk about this replica grammaticalization and so forth, but after the coffee. Thank you. Okay, guys, maybe we can think about starting slowly. Wait. Lucas, thank you very much for the paper. I know the paper. I thought it's like from their main introduction to the volume. Yes, 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 yes. This is a great paper because it kind of just outlines all those kind of more morphosyntactic and phonological features of the languages in the area. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. But I think it's the first kind of introduction of this kind, really cool. Yes. But thank you very much for sending it to me. Yes. Eso no es café. Okay, you guys. So maybe we can, but I'm not sure because Mateus, I think we're supposed to start at 11, 5 minutes to 11. Maybe we should wait for Mateus still to come. Yeah. Okay, you guys, maybe we can start. Chicas, vamos a empezar. Nossa, vamos a começar. Okay, you guys. So, another paper that I wanted to discuss in relation to what Hopper and Traugott discussed in terms of pigeons and creoles and grammaticalization, and calking, especially calking, is this paper, also another seminal paper on contact-induced grammaticalization, where Heine and Kutieva, they propose a model, and they propose such a thing as a replica grammaticalization that can be understood, that we can, through this replica grammaticalization, we can understand areal grammaticalization or grammaticalization areas. Yeah? Because in the previous talk, we didn't talk about Sprachbunds, we didn't talk about linguistic areas. So this is kind of an explanation how to model grammaticalization in those kind of contact situations where grammaticalization seems to be contact induced. So please, next slide. Yes, I will sit down maybe. Okay. Okay, so the main question that this paper tries to answer is whether grammaticalization and language contact interact, or they are separate processes. And obviously, from what we've seen so far, we've seen that they are not so much separate, yes, but they are combined processes, and we are going to see this much more in this paper. This paper tries to show that grammaticalization and contact-induced change are related, yeah, because previously this kind of long change assumption was that grammaticalization and contact is unrelated. So this is kind of the shift that they are indeed related. And that they work together in shaping the language change. Yeah. So we have language change. It's always has to do to some degree with contact. In some areas it might be more, in some other areas might be less, but there's still they still work together. They are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. When it comes to the language change, also what Hopper and Traugott didn't discuss is this kind of idea of just of the terms that are borrowed. And this is not only about the lexical items that are borrowed, but the grammatical patterns that are borrowed, yeah, under contact conditions. So please, next. Okay, so this kind of contact-induced change occurs when languages influence one another. It should be through monolingualism, that bilingualism, or in many of the cases it's multilingualism rather than bilingualism. Some kind of trait situations, migration, colonization, and so forth. Yeah, and this contact results in lexical borrowing as well as structural borrowing. Obviously, structural borrowing is much more difficult to show than lexical borrowing. Yes, and previously, typically the studies were confined in terms of the area. Yeah. That had specific social and historical events that might influence on what happens with the language. Yeah. And as I said, the classic idea was grammaticalization is a separate process, yes, linked to universal processes of grammaticalization. We talked about cognitive, semantic, pragmatic motivations, yes, but as I said, grammaticalization can also be triggered by processes related to language contact. Please, next. Okay, so contact may either accelerate existing grammaticalization paths or trigger new grammaticalization paths many times by analogy, yeah? And it also might introduce calques, so this calking process that we discussed, yeah? But it's calques not in terms of lexical calques, but in terms of grammatical structures, yes? And those processes, yeah, should be treated as mutually reinforcing one another, yeah? So this is different from the original grammaticalizations that we discussed in this course so far, yeah? Where the process is accelerated, where there is new grammaticalization structures coming in. Please, next. Okay, in the paper by Kutieva and Heine, they kind of introduced two different terms that are proposed by Weinreich, the model languages and the replica languages, yes? And for this model that we are gonna look at and we're gonna discuss, this is important, yeah? So the model languages are the languages that provide the model for transfer, and the replica languages are the ones that are using that model. Maybe it will become clearer when we kind of see the diagram, but generally model languages would be the one that is the lexifier languages in terms of the context situation. Yeah, like in terms of pidgins and creoles, that would be a lexifier language, but in terms of a context situation, there's always a dominant, more prestigious language that would be our model language. Yeah, and the replica language is the one that is in the situation of that contact with a prestigious language, yeah? So there is some kind of a transfer, yeah, that requires the speaker to identify certain grammatical structures and trying to replicate them, yeah? So speakers of the replica language might equate some kind of a grammatical concept in the model language, yeah, and they replicate that structure. And it's not just calking. So we're gonna see that model in a second. I'm sorry that I'm walking, but my belly hurts a little bit, so I kind of try to walk it out. But this is important here because so far, up to now, we discussed ordinary grammaticalization, and now we're gonna see how the replica grammaticalization works in this kind of context-induced environment where this is happening, where the speakers kind of replicate a structure that already exists in a model language into their languages, the replica languages, if you will. Please, next. Okay, so this replica grammaticalization would be a grammaticalization where a language A, so a replica language, grammaticalizes an item. So where the model language, let's say French, English, whatever, in the context of pidgins, let's say, you have a normal, ordinary grammaticalization. Yes, let's say that English would grammaticalize a motion verb, you know, the one that we saw, the one to go, into auxiliary denoting future tense, normal, ordinary grammaticalization. Then a language, a replica language, so the one that is in contact with a model language, they create a parallel grammaticalization pathway. Yes, so they kind of grammaticalize, you know, the same type of structure of motion verb into auxiliary denoting future, yes, but they are using their own material to do so. So the grammaticalization structure, the grammaticalization path is the same as in the model language, only their own material is used. And the outcome, you would have structurally similar markers, but they are not direct borrowing, because we are not borrowing lexical material, but we are borrowing, you know, just the grammatical construction behind it. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And I think, you know, just at this point, I think what is important, you know, just for this replica grammaticalization in terms of contact-induced context is this idea of acceleration of otherwise normal grammaticalization path. We've seen that grammaticalization generally takes a long period of time. As in Old Mesopotamian into Akkadian language, it took about 2,000 years, but generally a few hundred of years would be the normal time frame for grammaticalization to normally occur. But in those context situations, there is an acceleration of grammaticalization. So it becomes much more quicker. Therefore, the change might be a little bit different, you know, from what the normal grammaticalization would be. And sometimes this kind of has to do with predictability of grammaticalization path. Because under normal, ordinary grammaticalization, the path would be, could have been different. For instance, if you kind of have a grammaticalization that happens in a rapid succession. Yeah, but we're gonna see this. Please, next. Oh. Kind of got, okay. So you kind of have, you know, just this ordinary grammaticalization that we've seen so far, yeah? Maybe we can actually just even skip this because we've seen this. Please, next. We've seen ordinary grammaticalization over the last 3 days, so I'm not gonna flow you with that. But in terms of the normal grammaticalization that we've seen, yeah, is in any kind of a language, whether that's a replica language or a model language, a normal grammaticalization path is this, yes? From one construction onto the next, based on this, yeah? We are not talking about polygrammaticalization here, but a normal development of a Klein, let's say, Klein noun to an affix Klein. This is the way a normal grammaticalization goes. Now, please, next. When you have a replica grammaticalization, yes, it works a little bit differently. So, generally, the idea is that speakers of a replica language notice that there is some kind of a category that exists in a model language. The first step. Yeah, just kind of getting to understand that there is some kind of a structure, let's say future tense. That's easy always. Future tense, like the one that we saw in Rama, yeah, in the Chibchan language. Okay, so there is some kind of a structure, yeah, and those speakers, they want to create an equivalent category in the replica language, yeah, similar to that category that exists in the model language. Yeah. So, not always, but many times, they might identify what the historical development of that category was in a model language. So let's say that I'm borrowing my construction in English, I'm going to. It has that form of go. Yeah. So me as a speaker, I might deduce or abduce the development of go into going to. Yeah. So they identify that historical development in the model language, and by analogy, they apply the same formula in a replica language. Yeah. So that grammaticalization in the model language equates the grammaticalization in the replica language. And once that happens, then the speakers grammaticalize within their own language, within their own resources, that same grammaticalization path. Yeah? So rather than it being a natural process, it becomes a replica process using their own materials. Just have a coffee. Okay, good. Okay, so this is the model. This is the model that Heine and Kuntieva proposed. And we're going to see a number of examples for this. Please, next. Please, next. Okay, so there is many examples of this. And that kind of, that's why those types of things challenge the current, well, the models of ordinary grammaticalization, where the grammaticalization is seen without contact, yeah, without any kind of influence from the outside world. Okay, so you can you have some languages here, Druvea, no, some Austronesian languages that are spoken in New Caledonia, you know, and so those native languages, they had an obligatory semantic category of a dual. So there was a dual in those languages, yeah? And then there is a grammaticalization with the French lexifier input, yeah? When French has no dual marker, yeah? But the languages, so so the model language would have those dual markers, yeah? So Tayo, which is a language, a language that became lexified with French, yeah? Tayo attempts to replicate the category of a dual, yeah? But it uses the French numeral de. Yeah? So it is using the material from French, and they grammaticalize their own pronouns with using that material. So in Tayo, currently you have a dual number in which you have the first, second, and the third person originating that, with having this de or de, you added, and now you have nude, ude, lede. Yeah? So this kind of shows an example of what the replica grammaticalization can be in the situation of contact. And what is interesting is that instead of this gradual grammaticalization process that we have seen, we see accelerated grammaticalization through contact. Yeah? And what's really interesting in this scenario is that we kind of have you know, just this idea of skipping steps. Yeah, like we've seen this type of ordinary grammaticalization that you might have reanalysis, analogy, reanalysis, this cyclical thing, you know, where there's this huge grammaticalization path, how one construction became this, going 5, 6, 7 different steps in order to come to the current synchronic state of a construction. Now you kind of have this skipping of the steps. Yeah, so it doesn't have to go through all this long grammaticalization process. Okay, that was one example. I think I have 6 examples. So just bear with me. Please, next. Okay, there is another example of in Pipil, which is an Uto-Aztecan language spoken in El Salvador, where you have, under the influence of Spanish, yeah, in Pipil, you have a grammaticalization of relational nouns to prepositions. We've seen this grammaticalization of relational nouns before. I think that was one of the clients for nominal grammaticalization, where you have, you know, just this relational nouns grammaticalizing into secondary adpositions, then the primary adpositions, and so forth. I think CG was asking about those secondary adpositions. So there is a normal grammaticalization client. Now, so this is what Pipil did. Yeah, grammaticalize relational nouns into prepositions. So generally, people lacked a system of preposition that would be comparable to Spanish, didn't have it. And it used relational nouns. So for instance, at the side of, and so forth. And that was used to express spatial relations. And it grammaticalized from those relational nouns. For instance, you had those suffixes that were used as relational nouns. For instance, I don't know, here you had this pal possession, one was with, and so forth. And then it became prepossession. You can kind of see that they are clitics, fully independent, yeah? One could ask, this is a perfect example of degrammaticalization, if you will. We can kind of discuss this because you can kind of have a suffix that becomes a clitic, but that's something for next. But under contact, yeah, under the pressure from Spanish, this is what people does. And this is, again, an example of not ordinary grammaticalization, when you kind of have this internal grammaticalization of relational nouns becomes secondary adpositions, primary adpositions, and so forth, but they are replicating the systems of prepositions that Spanish has. Yeah, but what people also does, and that's beautiful in terms of replica grammaticalization, people is using its own material for those prepositions instead of borrowing the ones from Spanish. Yeah. Okay, please next. Okay. This is a lot of text, but don't worry, I will explain it. So Sorbian is a Slavic language spoken in Germany, very endangered language these days. Yeah, but Sorbian, being Slavic, didn't have definite articles. I mean, sometimes if you hear me speaking, maybe not so much English, but if you hear me speaking Spanish, you're gonna hear that me as a Polish speaker, I'm skipping definite articles many times because I don't know how to use them. I only pretend that I do. Yeah. So many Slavic speakers will have problems with the definite articles because we simply don't have them. Yeah. Now, Sorbian, being a Slavic, spoken in Germany with the dominant German language, which has very heavy definite, indefinite articles. Yeah. It develops a system of definite articles to kind of replicate the system that you have in German. Yeah. So, but what Serbian does is, instead of borrowing those German articles that you would normally do in the situation of a borrowing of a lexical form or functional form, Sorbian extends its own demonstrative systems. Yeah. So, in Sorbian, you have for the demonstrative, for the masculine, feminine, and neutral, because that's how Sorbian works. So that's how Slavic languages work. You have ton, that means this, ta, and to, exactly the same in Polish or Russian. So you kind of, so it uses this to extend it to have the definite articles. And we've seen this. We've seen the development, grammaticalization, ordinary grammaticalization of definite markers. I've shown you many times, like from Latin, ilo, that becomes a definite marker. We've seen, you know, just that thing exactly for Scandinavian languages, where you have this huset and that et that used to be a demonstrative. So this path is very common cross-linguistically. Demonstrative being developed into definite markers. Now, this is not a natural development. This is a mirroring of the definite article system from German, but using their own material. Yeah? So this is not an ordinary grammaticalization. Yeah? This kind of reanalysis of demonstrative systems into definite articles. Yeah? Okay, another example. Please, next. Okay, cool. Another example is a development of a Swedish auxiliary by the Swedes under the contact with English. Yeah. So in English, there is an auxiliary become. Yeah, to turn into. There is an auxiliary become, and a replica language is the Swedish that is spoken by bilingual immigrants in the US. So there is two languages in contact. English is the model language and Swedish is the replica language. Yeah, and the source of the construction is the lexical verb bekomma that exists in Swedish. Yeah, but it means something else. It means something like obtain, to affect, do good, do bad. So the phonological form matches, not so much the semantics. So under the model of replica grammaticalizations, when we have bilingual contact between Swedish and English, Swedish notice English usage of become, the auxiliary become, yeah, with this kind of inchoative meanings of to start being something, you know, just to start being inchoative meanings, yes, and that form of become, bekomma, no, that Swedish has, that form is being reanalyzed. So instead of borrowing become with this inchoative meanings, Swedish reuse bekomma, yeah, their native verb, and that bekomma grammaticalizes from a lexical verb into inchoative auxiliary. Yeah. So another example of a replica grammaticalization, but also with this flavor that because those two languages come from the same Indo-European language family, they actually had one thing that made it even easier, that grammaticalization is this kind of phonological similarity between became and bekomma. Yeah? So this mapping was much more natural than just borrowing a certain item. So in this case, we don't have an item that is borrowed, but reused the one that sounds similar, although the semantics is maybe a little bit different at the beginning. Please, next. Okay. Because I'm Polish, I love to give you Polish examples. Again, generally, the Slavic languages, they don't have the polite form, such as, for instance, I don't know, the one in Portuguese, but like in Spanish, you have the form of usted. So like just this kind of polite form. Slavic languages, they don't have it. In order to say the polite form, you would use plural you. You want, for instance, when you talk to your grandmother in Old Polish, you would say, grandma, you plural want. This was the way that it used to work in Slavic languages, and in almost all of the languages, this is still the case. Now, Polish did something else. Polish had a lot of contact with German. Yeah, had to be. I mean, even parts of Poland were German and so forth. History. Now, so you kind of have this model language being German. Yeah, and in German, there was an ordinary grammaticalization where German developed a polite second-person pronoun sie for you formal. Yeah, so in German, this kind of development grammaticalization happened in a natural way. So they have this politeness pronoun sie. Yeah, and that sie in Germany got extended from the third person. It doesn't matter. The development happened in German, natural way. Now you have Polish, which is in contact with German, and it tries to replicate the process that happened in German. Yeah. So that sie in German comes from the third person plural. Yeah. Now, Polish speaker in Silesia, which was original German territory, noticed this type of grammaticalization, formal usage of the pronoun coming from the third person. Yeah. And they noticed that this is this politeness pronoun in German. Yeah. So the Polish replicated it by extending their own material, so their own Polish pronoun, yeah, to this kind of polite new formal function. Yeah. What is interesting is, like, you might ask, just to a certain extent, to what you might ask yourself, just to what extent the speakers were aware of this historical pathway in German of the development of the Z. But they assumed the analogical path and they reproduced it. So that's another example of replica grammaticalization. And Polish, if I'm not mistaken, is the only Slavic language which has the polite form of this kind. Yeah? Please, next. Pennsylvania German. We talked about Pennsylvania German in terms of the development of that verb wolle, which I said that in religious context, you were not supposed to say, I want, yes? So you kind of developed a form from subjunctive to kind of avoid, just this religious constraints. So that's another example from Pennsylvania Germans that developed a proverb, yeah, from their own verb doing or to do, yeah. So in English, we've seen that do develops into a proverb, normal grammaticalization path. In a replica language, after very heavy contact with English, what Pennsylvania speakers do is they use their own verb do, to do, which also kind of reminds you of the Swedish example, that it's similar. At the end of the day, it's still a Germanic language, English and German, or Pennsylvania German. And the same grammaticalization path that happened for do in English is replicated for do in Pennsylvania German. Yeah? So what is interesting is that one could say for Pennsylvania German, if they look at without contact, they might say, hey, Pennsylvania German followed a normal cross-linguistic grammaticalization path. Yeah? But it's not the case, because they do it under the contact. They replicated the constructions that already exist in the model language under contact. Yeah? Okay, please, next. Oh, I think that would be the last example from Basque, the only isolated language spoken in Europe that I'm currently learning. It's a really cool language, very difficult. It's ergative, the only ergative language in Europe. So you have traditional Basque. Basque had no relative pronouns. Yeah. So when you wanted to have a relative clause in Basque, yeah, you would kind of have to do it via verbal morphology. Yeah, so you couldn't say in Basque literally Kasia, who is a girl, yeah, but then you'll be Kasia, being girl, being some verbal morphology, girl, something, something, right? That would be the old Basque construction. And now you have contact with Spanish. We know severe, heavy contact. And in Spanish, you have those interrogative pronouns in any kind of Romance languages. And that is this model category, yeah, that is being borrowed into Basque. So in Basque, you have this innovation where the speakers borrow the strategy, but they keep their original form. Yeah, so they had their own interrogative pronoun in the language. They use their own material, that interrogative pronoun, and they reanalyze the construction and they use it as a relative clause marker. Yeah, and you can kind of view it as an example of polygrammaticalization, because now Basque has two relative constructions. One is the verb suffix system, and from that suffix, you also have the grammaticalization of sein, yeah, for the relative clauses. At least that's how I understand Basque. If somebody has comments on this, I welcome them very kindly. Please, next. Okay, so we saw, I think, just based on those examples, we can kind of review the model and see how this works, yes? So yet again, speakers of the replica language noticed a category that exists in the model language. They want to recreate that category, yes, in their own language. They identify the historical path in the model language. They use an analogy and they apply the same formula, and they grammaticalize their own material to follow that category. So you kind of have a replica grammaticalization, which is different from an ordinary grammaticalization. Please, next. Okay, so I think if you look, at this replica grammaticalization from that point of view, you see that the contact-induced change is not as gradual as it is for the ordinary grammaticalization, yes? But still, I mean, it has certain paths to it. Now, generally, the idea is that, okay, maybe let's focus on the second part, that speakers work with what they have, so they use their own structures that exist in the language, yeah? And generally, if they don't copy, because we see cross-linguistically that some of the materials are being heavily copied, like, for instance, discourse markers. I mean, across indigenous languages in America, you have the form pero. Pero is being copied all over the place, so many forms are borrowed. But if you don't copy, yes, the form, if you don't do the lexical borrowing, but you do grammatical borrowing, you use the forms that exist in the language and you reanalyze them. Yeah, so you use your own material. And we've seen in this presentation that there is actually two paths for grammaticalization. One that is ordinary grammaticalization and one that is the replica grammaticalization. We've seen a lot of examples for that. Please, next. Okay. So it shows us also that evidence from the Pidgin and the Creole languages many years ago that Hopper and Thompson worked on, that we kind of a hybridization of change. It's not only the grammatical change, but it's but you have this change that combines the strategies of grammaticalization, the universal ones, just the path, the cognition. We talked about metaphor extension and metonymic processes and all those kind of processes, why change might happen. Yes, it combines those strategies that we already discussed in the previous days with external triggers from contact. Yeah. And this type of approach explains why many languages that are in contact, many language from language areas, they share similar grammaticalization features, yeah, without direct borrowing. So why those languages, for instance, in the Vaupés that we're going to see in the next example, why the languages don't borrow lexical material, but they borrow the patterns rather than actual words, yeah? So this replica grammaticalization explain the existence of similar grammatical categories in certain areas. Whoa, I'm not drinking coffee.
Yeah, I have a question that's maybe I don't understand exactly what is cock. I don't know, because from many examples, I see that the path of grammaticalization is really creates like paradigms, like definite articles and all that's really interesting. But like the Swedish English example, like from become having one meaning and changing to become with another meaning. How is this not a calc? Or can it be analyzed as a calc as well? And how different is this from, how different it really is replica grammaticalization from calc?
That this is a very great example, and I would say that calking involves having a construction without reanalyzing it. So basically, you copy a construction that exists without the process of reanalysis happening in the first place. Because we've seen in grammaticalization at the beginning, like I think the whole day number 1, we spent on talking about reanalysis and analogy. Yeah, of those 2 main processes for grammaticalization, where reanalysis was this process of rebracketing of constructions in the brain of the speakers first, before an analogy happens. The process of reanalysis is the process that is a covert process. You don't see it happening in the grammar. So grammaticalization happens in 2 steps. First, you have the reanalysis of a construction, and then you have the application of that construction to create rule generalization. So, for instance, the reason why you see grammaticalization is that it also occurs in other environments. It's used in other, like, okay, maybe I will just give you an example because I'm getting like very abstract here. We gave an example of childhood. Yeah, childhood, where you had first, so this kind of compounding, a nominal compounding in English. In Old English, you kind of had the word, the form killed or tild, which meant child, and hut, which meant person. Yeah, and now that's a process of reanalysis, because we see that this is being reanalyzed into having 2 different just as one grammaticalization. And now by analogy, you take that hood and you start, there's semantic bleaching and all the processes happening around it. By analogy, you see that hood appearing elsewhere in the language. So then you get adulthood, that it's still related to this hood as a person, because hood means like person, rank, so it's kind of like a human being. And then you get this as falsehood as well. So by analogy, you see that the process of reanalysis has already happened. Yeah. So I would say to answer your question, calking would be unconsciously copying a certain type of a material, but without reanalyzing it. That would be that. Yeah. Okay. So yes. So this type of replica grammaticalization, contact-induced grammaticalization, it actually provides us with more framework of how to understand diffusion in grammatical areas. In areal grammaticalization or grammaticalization areas, or Sprachbunds, or linguistic areas. Yes? So that would be that paper. Yeah? Okay, cool. Does anybody have questions about contact-induced grammaticalization by Heine and Kutieva?
Do they focus on the linguistic aspects, or they take into consideration the social historical aspects in their description of the phenomenon and proposition of a typology?
They do take an aspect, the social aspect of the development of the construction. They do. Yes. So maybe we can kind of see this in the last paper that I wanted to discuss today, the grammaticalization in the Amazonian context. Oh.
Just to clarify, so I'm just wondering the extent to which you can predict or more or less explain the case where you get real boring from the case where you get caulking on the basis of social historical aspects?
Very good question. Very good question. And so far, I have not seen any kind of predictability for the contact-induced grammaticalization. And I think the last paper is actually talking about how predictable grammaticalization is in the context situation. Because in the context situation, grammaticalization seems to be much more unpredictable than the ordinary grammaticalization. Yes? So Sasha is actually asking the very same question as you are. So maybe we can kind of focus on the last paper and then we can see how much time we have, because I wanted to talk a little bit about grammaticalization apurina, but I'm not quite sure how much time we have. So please, next. Okay. I kind of really like this paper because it's short, but like Sasha being Sasha is right straight to the point. And it kind of gives us like this short view onto the grammaticalization in the Amazon, obviously focusing more on Northwest Amazonia. And she's also focusing on what I said just to CG right now about limits of grammaticalization, predictability of grammaticalization. Yeah? So please, next. Okay, so Sasha is talking about the Vaupés, which is a highly multilingual area with heavy dominance of the Tucanoan languages, of the Tucano language, and the outlier of Tariana. I'm sure that you've heard most about Tariana and most about the Tucanoan languages and the Vaupés, so I'm not going to focus on this. But Sasha is also saying that that Tariana is very much unlike other Arawak languages. And the reason why Tariana is so different is because of this contact with the Tucanoan languages and the grammaticalization that happened. This replica grammaticalization, she doesn't say it in those terms, but this is what she means in the context of the previous article that we described. But this is the result of this type of replicating the patterns that exist in the situation of heavy contact and heavy dominance of the Tucanoan languages, of the Tucano, precisely. Okay, she's also saying about typological rarities of some of the grammaticalization paths that happen in the Amazon, yes, and something that might expand the limits of what we know in terms of cross-linguistic patterns of grammaticalization, yeah? Because we have those beautiful descriptions and those beautiful paths. This is how it happens, and an existential construction becomes a locative, becomes a possession, becomes this and this. But she's saying, well, when you look at the Amazonian languages, you're actually seeing that grammaticalization paths go out of this world, you know. It just kind of, it's very difficult to kind of predict grammaticalization, not just because of contact, but because the way grammaticalization happens, yeah. Okay, we're gonna see examples, so let's please next. Okay, so one of the examples of grammaticalizations in Tariana, which I said, it's an Arawak language, very different from other North Arawakan languages. Well, very different. I mean, different because you see the Tucanoan flavor onto it. one of the grammaticalizations that she describes is this grammaticalization from verb roots into bound morphology, something that didn't happen for other Arawak languages. Yes, so she is talking about verbal roots that grammaticalizes into affixes, well, some clitics as well, and some clitics that grammaticalize into affixes, doesn't matter, but generally you have those verbal roots grammaticalize into more grammatical roots, yes. And she's talking especially about this system of aspect markers, yes, that is being developed in Tariana from the verbs. Yeah. So one example here is this, basically. This is the traditional Tariana, the first example, and the second example is how Tariana is spoken these days. Yes, she calls it innovative Tariana, but it's basically non-traditional Tariana. In Arawak languages, you have very commonly serial verb constructions. Those languages have serial verb constructions everywhere, yes? But in traditional Tariana, you see those serial verb constructions, yeah? Nese nui nutna. Here, you have this inu, yes, kill, this inu, and then sita to finish. So I kill, with some kind of visual, I finish. I kill, I finish. This is the serial verb construction, very common for all the Arawak languages. Now, in Tariana, under contact with Tucano, yeah, what happens is that this sita, yeah, which was originally a lexical verb, becomes a bound form, yes, meaning to finish. So Tariana under contact is developing from the verb finish a suffix meaning perfective aspect. You would kind of see this development from finish into perfective aspect as an ordinary grammaticalization, but as we've seen for the examples of replica grammaticalization, this is exactly the same thing that happens under Tucano, yeah? So you can't really view those things as a separate grammaticalization path that would be universal, yes, but as a replica grammaticalization. Please, next. Now, if you could please go back, sorry. If you could maybe go back, yes. And I wanted to kind of show to you that in Tucano, there is a very similar suffix, toa, yeah, to do, yeah. So this kind of aspectual marker as well, but the form that is being replicated is formed from Tariana, not the borrowed from Tucano, yeah. So what we've seen previously in many examples of replica grammaticalizations. Please, next. Yes, and this thing, this kind of development from serial verb constructions into bound morphology is happening in Tariana only. When you have examples of this kind in Baniwa, for instance, other North Arawak languages, you still see serial verb constructions, such as, for instance, here. When you have I kill, I finish. There is no one verb that has that bound morphology followed by finish, as we saw now for Tariana. Please, next. Okay. That's another example here, how this happens, yes? Because that thing for finish is universal, cross-linguistically, yes? I mean, the verb for finish, if you look for a grammaticalization path, you see that it's something that happens cross-linguistically. It's nothing really so strange about it. Now, Sasha gives a lot of examples that are not cross-linguistically common. An example of this is, for instance, the verb kawi, yeah, to be awake. Yeah. So Tariana takes that lexical verb and it develops it into a verbal morphology as a bound morpheme, yes, and it's being used here, yeah. So you have third person put be awake in the meaning of be early, yes. So she makes manioc bread early, yeah. Be early, this is the same. Be awake, be early, yes, this is understood in terms of there is some kind of semantic change, still under contact, that change, but that form, that native form is used for this, which is unlike other Arawak languages. Now, if you look at Tucano, Tucano has the same thing, where you can kind of have this be early, yeah? So, while you had finish, the verb to finish, grammaticalizing into a spectual perfective marker, and that's common cross-linguistically, things like be awake, grammaticalizing into be early is not so much common cross-linguistically. That's the main idea. Please, next. Okay, so Sasha gives a number of action enclitics, yes, showing that those forms grammaticalized from verbs, yeah? So we have things such as, for instance, I don't know, the last thing, such as slip, slide, yeah? Grammaticalizing into a bound morpheme such as slip all of a sudden. Or things such as göra, be unconscious, grammaticalizes into lose consciousness. Yeah? So generally, when you look at the semantic motivation for grammaticalization that we discussed in day 2, yeah? Metonymic, metaphorical, all of those things, you can't predict what grammaticalizes and when. Yeah? Please, next. And you can kind of see that many of those aspectual enclitics in Tariana, they are not the result of a normal grammaticalization process, but they are the result of contact with Tariana, of Tucano. So the one that we saw before, sita, yeah, from the verb to finish, grammaticalizes into the enclitic already accomplished, the perfective, and you have the same thing in Tucano. We've seen that example already, but you have things such as, for instance, jena, pass over, surpass, yeah, or you have things such as to deceive, to miss, to forget, grammaticalizes to things such as almost do, so kind of advertive, so like action nearly averted, yeah? And it all has to do with what Tucano does, yeah? So again, you are not borrowing the forms of Tucano, but you are using your own material to do this, to do the replica grammaticalization in Tariana, yeah? Using the form. But now, if you think about it, again, I want to stress this to you. If you think about it, you can't predict the motivation for this, for the grammaticalization. The only motivation for grammaticalization here is the contact and the replication of the existing structure, but it's not the universal path in which the grammaticalization would normally go. Yeah? Please, next. Okay, so in Tariana, Sasha also stresses that, you know, just that we also saw in many of the other examples is from the previous paper, is this kind of rapid grammaticalization, yeah? So not a normal, natural way in which grammaticalization would just occur, but it's rapid because it's between one generation to the next, yes? And this kind of idea that was stressed before is that this acceleration of change, and a natural acceleration of change within a generation that happens, Yeah, because generally all this kind of grammaticalizations that we described before, they took a long periods of time. This is within a generation. Yeah, so she is asking a question, yeah, that whether grammaticalization change types that happen are similar for languages that are endangered or that are healthy. Yeah. So she's kind of talking, she's kind of talking about endangerment state, asking how does grammaticalization include language endangerment and what happens with those endangered languages in terms of grammaticalization. Yes, so she's kind of, just pointing to the fact that in endangered languages, the grammaticalization that we will see is the one that is rapid and that is accelerated. And that is a replica grammaticalization. Yeah, please, next. Okay. Yes. We talked about those things, the bound morphemes and one that last generation, yes, under the contact with the Istukanoan. Contact intensification in terms of grammaticalization, but she's also pointing to the fact that I also talked about, is that there is things in Tariana that grammaticalizes that are not universally predictable in terms of how things will grammaticalize. So, for instance, she gives the example of the verb jump that grammaticalizes into manner of action, something that suddenly something happened. Yes, and she is also giving things such as, for instance, the one that we saw, I think, Jana, to deceive or to miss, that grammaticalizes into an action nearly averted. I almost did it, but I didn't do it. Yeah. So she is asking how predictable grammaticalization paths will be in intensive context situation, because this is not universally seen across languages. This is not predictable. We can predict, for instance, that go, motion verb go, will grammaticalize into future tense, but this, very difficult to predict. Please, next. Okay, so she's kind of pointing, just to the use of frequency, to the frequency of use, I should say, in endangered languages. Because many of those verbal roots that we've seen are not understood by the young speakers of Tariana anymore because of the language endangerment. Tariana is spoken by some 100 people, yeah? So, in those endangered languages, the grammaticalization will follow the frequency of use rather than anything else because of the fact that the language itself is endangered, yeah, or highly endangered, yeah. Then she's also citing something that I didn't mention this course so far by Dubois. Grammars code best what speakers do most, yes, and yes, so based on all of this, yes, based on this kind of predictability and what can happen to grammaticalization, she's asking a very valid question that maybe, just more like a rhetorical question than anything else, but a question that nevertheless, I think it's nice to ask, is that if there is so many things that grammaticalize, such as, for instance, jump, that grammaticalize into a spectral marker, if deceive can grammaticalize into action nearly averted marker, so something that you can't predict, yeah? Are there limits to which verbs can grammaticalize? Yes? So she's asking a more broad question of, if we have so many strange examples, can we actually put a limit onto grammaticalization? Yeah, so instead of writing a lexicon of grammaticalization, we will have a lexicon of grammaticalization that never ends, because you can't put a limit on it. If any word can grammaticalize, and you can't predict that grammaticalization. Yeah, please, next. And she's also giving, I think, some examples from the Amazon, how they grammaticalized. I think it's nice, just to mention. Grammaticalizations that are also very difficult to predict as well. She is talking about grammaticalizing in Hoop, another Hoop language, yes, in which Hoop, similar to other languages from the Vaupes area, is not borrowing lexical material, but is borrowing, is replicating the grammatical patterns. Now, she is saying that in Hoop, our non-visual evidential that all of those languages have comes from a compound verb, which means to produce sound, make noise. That's a type of a grammaticalization that is cross-linguistically not common. Yeah, it's you wouldn't predict that. Yeah. Please, next. And then she's giving a lot of examples that show very unique grammaticalization paths. So, for instance, in Piro, an Arawak language, a noun for sound is used as a reported evidential. It's also not something that you would predict, more from the verb to say, if you look at the universal paths of grammaticalization. In the Yanomama and the Yanomami language, you have the noun stone that grammaticalizes into a classifier for hard objects. Yeah. Well, you can kind of argue whether that would be more universal or not. Then you have Shamatauteri language, where you have ko, a noun ko, meaning hard, grammaticalizes into something like a classifier for round things. Yes. In Boramiranya, you have a borrowing from Spanish, yes, which ends with ta. So you have this ta, grammaticalizes into metal objects. And Paresi, you have, just this pastel. So pilau, I translated that, grammaticalizes into cylindrical objects. And then in Palikur, you have the body part nose that grammaticalizes into pointed objects. Yes. So Sasha, again, going back to that question, is asking how much of the limit do we have in grammaticalization if all of those languages can grammaticalize completely different things. Yeah? Is there limits to grammaticalization? Please, next. And she was also giving that example of excessive plural in Warakena, where you have, just this bound nominal marker naui, that is used as an excessive plural, so very many. Yeah. Apparently, this type of development is also not attested anywhere in the world. Yeah, in terms of grammaticalization. Yeah. So she's saying that Amazonian languages push grammaticalization beyond normal limits. Yeah. Because they product entirely new grammatical structures. And she's actually, just rhetorically saying more, I think, to kind of just raise the issue rather than make a claim. She's saying, well, there might be no strict limits on what lexical material can become grammaticalized. And I think that's something very interesting to ask and maybe to talk about, if you will. But as we've seen in the previous days, we kind of talked about grammaticalization paths, ordinary grammaticalization paths that were kind of established. And obviously, still a lot of data is lacking, but whether the Amazonian languages show that there is no strict limits on what type of lexical material can actually grammaticalize. Yes? So I think that's it. Please, next. Let me see if I have another slide. Yes, that's it. So I kind of want to see if you guys have questions. No? Too much data? Yeah? No, nothing, nothing. Nothing comes to your mind. We will talk about this nominalization, well, not nominalizations, verb compounding that gave rise to classifiers. Yeah, but I think the question is valid, and I think it's something that at least it's nice to entertain the thought about limits of grammaticalization. Yeah. Something that, like at the beginning of this course, I kind of added, just this question, still theoretical, because this is more like to entertain a thought, whether grammaticalization ever ends. Yeah. So it's this type of a question, whether grammaticalization has a limit, whether there is actually a certain path that we can create maybe one day for all the languages, saying, okay, that thing develops into this and this and this, and that's it. If everything can grammaticalize into everything, then does the grammaticalization have an end? Is it predictable? Yeah. Because based on the data that we have so far, there is some predictability that we can make. Now, based on this, is there? Yeah. So it's something, just to entertain our brains rather than to provide actual answers. And I kind of wanted to ask, because we still have some time, maybe you can talk about grammaticalization in Apurina, CG. Or compounds, like whatever you want. It's up to you. I was asking CG because tomorrow we are going to have a number of presentations, so maybe we can kind of split them. And since that's it for today, I think it would be really nice to start today, and CG would be the first one to tell us about, I don't know which one you're going to choose, the compa or, yeah?
Compounds.
Oh, the
Non-compounds.
Uh-huh.
Compounds.
The noun compounds. Okay, great. Please.
But now,
Yes, if you could. I mean, otherwise, do you prefer tomorrow?
yeah, because we have
We still do have 20 minutes, and I ran out of the slides for today. So I don't have any more slides. So unless nobody has questions. Ah, perfect. Perfect.
se projetado aqui,
Eu encerro a transmissão ou você vai
Não,
querer
não, você permite, porque tem gente. Só. Okay, então, I'm gonna speak in English, okay, so that she can follow. Vou falar em inglês para ela poder acompanhar. Então, isso aqui é uma versão já um pouco antiga, né, de uma apresentação de algo que já apresentei em outros lugares. Isso aqui foi apresentado na Austrália, numa conferência na Austrália. Então, tem algumas coisas não atualizadas. Isso passa. Está querendo passar? Isso foi com minha ex-esposa, tá? Ela já mudou. Olha, e voltou, vamos ver se... Sim. Acho que se não... eu acho que a memória está muito lenta. Mas vocês conseguem, vejam se vocês conseguem visualizar. Agora vem, vamos ver se continua. Ele está sobrecarregado o computador. Ele não está querendo passar. Mas até mandar agora já não está conseguindo, não estou conseguindo passar. Yeah, there is a version. It was published in Thailand, so not many people know about it. But I've given a number of talks. I've talked about it from different perspectives, different places. It does not want to. Okay, so let's see how far it will go. So it's pretty much, this is the noun categories in Apurinan, and this is just to show pretty much that among the several subclasses of noun, we have one of obligatorily possessed nouns, the inalienable nouns, okay? And that they divide into two classes. The nouns that are used with classificatory functions, which I call the classificatory nouns, and the ones that are not used with classificatory functions. And in the class of classificatory nouns, I divide into two types. The ones that are not productively used and not used metaphorically. Actually, they can be productive, but not metaphorically used. And the ones that are very productive and used metaphorically. So this shows the, let's see if this will go. Não adianta, enquanto ele não passar, porque eu estou com muita coisa aberta aqui. Isso funciona aqui. Ok. Então aqui tem so here we have the examples that shows the phenomena. So you have nouns, okay, like the noun for tree, which is amuna, and any tree will have a trunk, right? So tsota is the word for the trunk, so that this can go with the noun for any tree. The same thing for, here the example, mango tree, for example. This is a long word, right? From Portuguese, for mango. And mango tree or mango trunk would be mango tsuta, ukutsuta, and so on. So this is the common use. It's use with the literal meaning of it. It's different from this use here, where you have another word for trunk, which is muna, and it can be used, for example, for flashlight. Flashlight would be lanterna mina, again, a long word with the classificatory noun. The word for the, like, the, what do you call it? The thing that supports the house, right? So ahí combina house plus trunk, or in the context of a story, this was not listed. Comes from a story of a tapir. It talks about the genitalia of the tapir, and when it wants to emphasize the shape, they call pichemuna. This is penis. This is like the trunk of the penis. Just means the tapir's penis. For the nose of specific animals, kirimina, not the nose of people, right? Like the nose of the tapir, for example. And this is another one that shouldn't even be here, but which is used for like branch. It's used with the literal meaning here. What's going on there? Yeah, now it says it cannot share. I think it's because I have too many things running my computer. Damn, it's not sharing, right? Oh, here it is. It's coming and going.
It can stay this way, at least we can see it.
You can see, right? Because, yeah, it's not projected anymore. Okay, so if you can see, it's okay. Hopefully we'll work this. Oh, it's just doing by itself. It becomes, okay. So here you have the use of a list of the word forms, the noun forms that have that function that can be used as part of compounds. So those are the ones that can be used only with the literal meaning, okay? They cannot be used to refer to other things that are not related to the literal meaning of the nouns. So this is the first list. And then you have the second list, which includes the ones that can be used both with the literal meaning and to refer to body parts or to manufacture elements. Okay, here is just using the framework of Lakoff and Johnson to talk about metaphor as source and target domains. And the idea is that the plant parts domain is the source domain, and even the body parts, the part domain, because the literal meaning is not contrary to what happens in other languages. The source meaning really is plant parts, not body parts. Therefore, this is a second list. That's why I call the classificatory noun sub 2, the second category of classificatory nouns. Here you have the list of all of them together in the same table. Okay, the ones that can be used, metaphoric or not. And this is the mapping between the domains. So pretty much all of them can be used to refer to plant parts, but they also can be used to refer to, some of them can be used to refer to body parts. And some of them can be used to refer to manufactured elements such that, or you get this mapping. Pretty much 99.9% refer to plant parts. There is one, perhaps two cases where it could refer to body part, which is the word mata for skin or fur. But even this one, it's not impossible that originally referred to body part, like the thin bark of a tree, different from the, it's not the word for bark. The word for bark is tanta, it's another word, okay? But this one can be used, literally, normally it's interpreted as skin, so the indication is that it does refer originally to body part. It's the only clear example. There may be maybe one more. Part of them can be used to refer to manufactured elements. So it seems to be pretty clear that in Apurina, the source is plant parts and elements of nature. So this is just the mapping between the two. And this is I think the most interesting part is when you look into the semantics of it, what you see is just what you find in classifying system or classificatory systems, okay? But it's not something that is grammaticalized or fully grammaticalized in the language, but the semantics is there. What does that mean? It means that the language, to some degree, distinguish between length in terms of being short and long, que é o muna, such that you can find words that a tree that is ankia, for example, or amenakia, it's a tree that is shorter than one that is just amuna, okay? But this is not an important distinction because the most important distinction is not length. Length's not important in Apurina. What's important is whether it's thin and flexible. Then every time it's going to be kia. And every time it is cylindrical, thick, it's going to be muna. This is consistent. So this distinction between width, being thick or thin, that's more important than the length distinction. That's very clear. Flexibility is important. If it's flexible, it's going to be with kia, not with mina. If it's rigid, it's going to be mina. So this is important. Linearity, it is more or less important. Anything that is linear, which kind of, in a way, relates to length. It will be kia if it's not too thick, but it fits not linear like a liana, a cipó, it's going to be sa. So muna, and you have a pizza here, which is used for specific types of liana. So this P could be the one that in Arawak languages for snake, that is here, but with different vowel. And this one, certainly this one, which is for things that are not linear. Okay? So this distinction is important. This one I already talked about. This one is kind of important. For things that are small, normally we would take two, but it fits big. It's gonna be two, almost not exactly like a diminutive or mentative system, but close to it, like on the way to become, perhaps. And here the distinction, another distinction, I already talked about muna, right? But muna, because it's cylindrical, it's three-dimensional, right? But mata, which is For skin, it's flat. So it's unidimensional, such that for things that you may refer to this kind of shape, you're going to use mata. But if it has clearly 3-dimensional, you could use mina. But this distinction is not, this one is important, whether it's flat or not. But if it's, although you make the semantic distinction between being flat or not flat, it's not very important in the language. And this is one that I have to thank Colette, then Craig, now Greenwald, when she was my advisor in my MA, that she called me attention because I couldn't make sense out of ta. It just didn't make sense. And then I told her, well, it goes with come, to come. No? It goes with, I don't remember the at the time what I told her the examples, and then she realized, yeah, but see, everything you're talking about has a round edge, and that's exactly what it is. Things with a round edge, or what do you call? There is a word for that. I forgot now. But things that have a round edge, we'll take smooth edge. We'll take the ta. And I couldn't believe at the time that they could make such a distinction, but it clearly is the case. And then these are all related to shapes, right? And then look what you get here. You have the word for ash or powder, okay? And you could use also pe if it's, there is a little bit of a difference, but a subtle difference. So pani is going to be with sand, it's going to be with ash, and pe has a little more substance. It's not as like granular, but still is powder-like thing. And then you have this one for liquid. This one here, actually, it should be this plus this one, because it's not just liquid, it is liquid, but with some consistency to some extent. So probably this one, for some of them, might be already grammaticalized, but probably, I mean, and some still distinguished because they length this, they pronounce pan rather than pen, but no one pronounces pen because there is a vowel harmony there. So that's, some people still don't seem to believe it, but Napolina, it seems very clear. It comes from from plant parts, and it can be incorporated with classificatory function. It does not occur doesn't function as number of classifiers. It can be used derivationally for some words. I mean, like the word for glass is the word for eye plus the word for tanta, which is the word for bark. And there are some other words that are derived using these classificatory nouns. But so in a way, they have the same function as the class terms in Thai or other languages. So that's why I wrote this paper with my wife, which is former wife, was speaker of Thai, and they do the comparison. But it comes in a typologically different language, so it's polysynthetic. Therefore, it can get a lot more of morphology. So it can work. It can go a little bit. It doesn't become a noun classifier like it does in Thai. But it can be incorporated, and in some cases it can be used more or less anaphorically. So it has the resemblance of classifier, but I don't call it classifier because I think it has important distinctions that when you call it classifier, because some people have been calling, what do they call it? It's I forgot the name. That's safer, huh? No, class term is the old form. That's something old in the literature, comes from Southeast Asian language. But Frank Safar, I think he was the one that introduced the term, and other people have been used. They create a new category of classifier. Yeah, it could be if you want to create another category of classifying called classify and qualify it. It's okay with me, but I think it has enough. He used a different name. But I think it has important distinctions in order to, and we need to make sure people pay attention to those distinctions.
Thank you so much, Siri. I know that Seifert, like when he wrote his grammar description of noun classes in Irania, 2005. Yes, so he was talking about those things. May I ask a question? Like if we can go back, go back, like all the way, like please, because like like to those examples that you were showing. Oh, this. Like what strikes me, like for Amazonian languages, you know, and maybe I wonder what you think about those things, because this na, right? This kind of seems to be like this pan-Amazonian na for vertical, round things like trees.
There's some reminiscence of that in Apurina also. There are some animals that, if they are longer, they are kipatina, for example, the type of agouti. It's different from pekiri, and it has that na. Some animal names have that na. So I think that's what survived it, but it's not productive in the language. This part, I think it's grammaticalized, but I think it probably the na comes from the, or the other way around, or yeah.
Really interesting. Like, how many classifier position does Apurina have? So how many classifiers can a noun take?
Interesting things. Some of them can, for example, amna. Has some properties of, can go with any tree, any plant, or anything related to a plant. Like would be flower, sota, it's gonna be root, ankia, it's gonna be branch. So it's in the wrong place, and but because normally it goes in the second position of the compound, but it has some resemblance of classifiers. But I think at the most I've got two. But I think there are some cases you can get three, but it's not that common. It's when the ones that are most productive are present, like ke or ku. Because you can derive new nouns with the classificatory nouns. In those cases, you can have more than one. But it's not clear if it's classificatory nouns that are being piled up, or if it's just a lexical unit that you're getting classificatory noun on top of the lexical unit.
So we might actually just be talking about like incipient grammaticalization for some of them, because like for what I know, for the Amazonian languages of southern Colombia, you see that there is up to 3 classifier positions. Yes, but it's very unusual to have 3. Mostly it's 1 or 2. And now what I kind of wondered, the reason why I asked about this na, is that in many of those languages, I see grammaticalization of classifiers from monosyllabic into disyllabic. And there is certain types of semantic connections that classify, you know? So, for instance, you know, like I would have a classifier for gobe. So gobe would be kind of round, and then be would be flat. But it's not bego, it's gobe. It's always round, flat, round, flat, round. It's never flat, round, front. So I kind of wanted to ask you, because many of the classifiers that I know from Southern Colombia are results of grammaticalization of certain categories. Round, flat, round, flat. So there is, you know, there is this kind of semantic meanings that tend to combine. And not other way around, but certain round, flat, and many others. So I kind of wonder if you've seen any kind of grammaticalizations of those classifiers with certain semantics, maybe, you know, that there is some kind of semantic paths that just tend to grammaticalize, but not others.
You mean when like true classifiers, they are reanalyzed as a morpheme?
So if I see this now, because you were also talking about this phonological reduction. Phonological reduction, but the evidence from many of the languages shows that this is a normal classifier cylindrical vertical. So I would see, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm different. This as a grammaticalization of me. Some kind of bisyllabic thing that grammaticalized into one classifier in a certain semantic domain, like this vertical cylindrical comes at the end and like something upright, you know? But there's like what I really kind of like is, you know, just this semantic domains that tend to grammaticalize one semantic domain, but it's always a combination of these specific ones. It's never any domain, but like very specific ones, you know, that tend to combine and grammaticalize. You know what I mean? Because this, like, even if you don't know what it means, taking an assumption that this is cylindrical, vertical, it's not numbly, but it's minna. So this not always occurs at the end. I mean, I'm not specific.
Okay, they have to close the building. These things, they have to close the building because it's past the time.
Did we go out of time? Oh, sorry. Okay, so maybe we can finish, you know, just this talking about this tomorrow, CG. But it's really. Sorry that I went a little bit longer. Really interesting. You know what I can see? Sometimes, like, many of the, you know, just even like the seeker, there is always